Let's talk a little bit about assessment and personality study. Assessment is quite important in a number of subfields in psychology. For example, if a clinical psychologist feels that their regular assessment or clinical interviews in their intake isn't sufficient, or if there is something amiss in trying to understand their client, they might turn to personality assessments to determine additional information about the patient before proceeding or continuing to proceed with therapy. Personality assessment may also take place as a way to match a patient, rather, a person's job interests, their suitability for a particular job with a requirement for a position. And two important consideration when deciding what assessment tools to use is whether or not the assessment tool adheres to the principles of reliability and validity. Reliability involves the consistency of responses to an assessment device. One way to think about reliability is whether or not you are likely to get the same results depending on when you administer the test or who administered the test. Reliability is simply how consistent your device will achieve the response. Validity, on the other hand, refers to whether or not an assessment device measures what it is intended to measure. If a test does not measure what it claims to, then it is not valid. Therefore, it cannot be used to predict behavior. Now, you can have an instrument that is reliable but not valid, but it is very, very hard or nearly impossible to have a valid instrument that's not reliable. For example, if you look at a clock, in many instances, people use a clock and they set the clock 5 to 10 minutes early to be able to help them to stay on time. Now, every time you look at that particular clock, it will always be 5 or 10 minutes early, but it is not an accurate measure of the actual time. So in that instance, the clock is reliable because every time you look at it, it is 5 to 10 minutes early, but it is incorrect. Okay, so it's very important to make that distinction. Here are a variety of self-assessment, a variety of assessment methods. You have a self-report inventory, an approach that involves people to report on themselves by answering questions about their behavior and feelings in various situations. One of the there are a number of self-report inventories. There are objective measures like the MMPI, which is a Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. The MMPI is the most useful self-report personality test. It consists of 567 true or false statements, and the items cover physical, psychological health, political, social attitudes, educational, occupational, family, variety of factors, neurotic behavior tendencies, and the scale has been validated and it's been standardized for use from a variety of populations. It requires objective scoring and it can be quickly assessed. But it can be very tedious for people because many of the items seem repetitive, but that was designed on purpose to enhance reliability of the measure. Objective measures or objective self-report inventories are not really suitable for people who have limited reading skills, and people do tend to answer in a more socially desirable way. But it's very reliable, and a lot has gone into developing and testing this measurement. You can also conduct online test administration. Online test administration naturally is less time consuming and expensive. You can post this on some social media sites, and younger people tend to feel more comfortable doing this. and it also prevents people from looking ahead at their questions or changing their answers. Now, other type of self-report or assessment method rather is projective tests. Projective tests of personality can be used to, much of it is used by psychoanalytic theorists or those with psychoanalytic inclinations. The idea behind projective tests is to prompt that invisible portion of a person's personality. The idea is that projective techniques work in that when individuals are presented with ambiguous stimuli, like an ink blot or a picture that can be interpreted in many ways, they will project their innermost feelings, fears, values onto that stimulus when they're asked to describe it. Now, because the results of the projective test so subjective, these tests are not particularly high in reliability or validity. A couple of examples of projective techniques is the ink blot I mentioned earlier. The ink blot, you may have seen these. These are pictures of ink. Some are black and white and some are red, are colored. And there are 10 cards, 5 black, 5 in color, that are shown one at a time. And respondents are asked to share what they see in the picture. Another example is a thematic apperception test, which consists of ambiguous pictures that show more than one person, and people are asked to tell a story about the people and the object in the picture, describing what led up to the situation shown, what are the people thinking and feeling. Other types of tests that might be used or types of assessment measures include the clinical interviews. Clinical interviews involve asking participant questions about their past, their life experiences, social family relationships, reasons for seeking help. Clinical interviews are generally used and are often used by clinical psychologists, mental health providers who get a sense of why the person has that particular problem, and to get insight into their psychological makeup. The advantages to clinical interviews in that problems can be explored in detail, but the disadvantage, of course, it can be subjective. Other assessment methods include behavioral assessments, and here observers are actually evaluating the person's behavior in a particular situation. So the better the observer knows the people, the more accurate their evaluations are likely to be. So in a case of, you might have somebody observe, the clinician observing how husband and wife may interact. But of course, there's it's somewhat less systematic and therefore subject to errors. There's also a method called thought and experience sampling. This can be used as, in other words, other terms you might see is ecological momentary assessments, where variations of thoughts, participants are asked to describe their thoughts, what's going on in a particular moment when they're experiencing something. The thought and experience sampling usually relies on technological development. For example, if you have an app that collects this information, you might get a bling, and when you look at your phone or your smart device, you're asked to report on your feelings or what you're doing, or a number of other standardized questions in that moment. The advantage is that it can really determine how context influence your thought and mood, but participants may sometimes just ignore that ping or that reminder to record, so they might forget to record their activity. So those are some of the common ways in which assessments can be made. But it's important to note that there are issues of some biases that might, some factors that might influence the assessment personality, like gender, like ethnicity, race, For example, women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression, anxiety. They're much more likely to expand on experiences of emotion than men. What else? With the different ethnic issues in assessment, we also know that Asians are typically less likely to seek help for emotional problems, and there's been notable problems with some types of assessments in terms of its bias against African Americans. So when selecting assessment methods, it must be crucial. You must try to understand the some of these issues in assessments. Another important thing to note is Hispanics are less likely to seek psychological assessments than their Caucasian counterparts. So just wanted to expand on that. Please be sure to read up on these assessments in the textbook. And if you have any questions, be sure to post your questions on the course discussion board, the questions and answer forum, and I'll be sure to expand on this. Bye-bye.